Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about raising baby chicks outside. What you can see behind me is an incredibly sophisticated, beautiful, Pinterest-worthy chick raising setup. Just kidding. It is just a collection of random things we had on hand and kind of threw together to make it possible to raise chicks outside. So today I'm going to go through the main things that we focus on to keep our chicks safe and healthy when we raise them outside from pretty much day one, maybe day 2 or 3 if we're actually hatching them ourselves. And then at the end, I'll go through some of the pros and the cons to raising them outside. I did write a blog post with all of the points from this video. If you want kind of the Spark Notes version, I'll link that for you below. But without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing I want to point out about raising chicks outside is that I do not believe it is for beginners. So if you are a first-time chick owner, this is a great educational video, but I would not recommend trying to take this on your first time. There is a really good chance that something will go wrong and you won't be able to spot it soon enough and you will lose chicks. So I really recommend if you are newer to raising chicks, check out some of my earlier videos about raising chicks inside. I'll link some below, but I'll go into why this is not for beginners. There are some various factors that you want to be able to catch, some behaviors of the chicks and some sounds the chicks make that you'll want to be able to catch right away. And a lot of people I think who are just getting started aren't quite able to tell the difference or spot those warning signs. If you've raised chicks inside a few times, I think this is totally possible to tackle as long as you can read chicks. So let's move on. My second point is that heat is absolutely essential. Supplemental heat for chicks. We do not use heat lamps. We tried heat lamps the first time we raised chicks years ago for a few days. It made us super uncomfortable. All the warnings on the boxes to never leave them alone, that kind of thing. Just too much that can go wrong there. So what we have used ever since then for every batch of chicks that we've had is a radiant heat brooder, and we have never lost a chick since they have been moved into their brooder. We have never lost a chick because of a radiant heat brooder error, so I highly recommend them. I will link the one or some of the ones that we use. But while supplemental heat is definitely essential if you are raising chicks inside, it is even more so essential outside. So I would say don't think just because it's really warm outside that you can skip the heat. It is so important that those chicks have somewhere to go that they can warm up.
Plenty of calories are just as important as enough heat with baby chicks. And what we love to do is start supplementing our chicks with Grubterra as soon as possible. Grubterra did partner with us on today's video. There are so many delicious micronutrients in these black soldier fly larvae for them. They're dried, so they have a nice long shelf life. And because they can't get enough of these treats, it really helps them turn into really friendly older chickens. Make sure to use our discount code OKABODE for 10% off if you haven't tried Grubterra already. And as always, I'll link them for you below.
My third point is to keep an eye on the weather. I have raised chicks now twice in the summer, which is this year, and then last year we actually raised them in the fall when it was quite a bit cooler. Now, I will say the cooler the weather is, the riskier it is and the more careful you have to be. But that being said, especially if you are getting chicks when it is warm outside, the past few weeks we've been having heat spells in the upper 80s or 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and our chicks are so happy out here. They do still have their brooder and somewhere they can go to get even warmer if they need to. But I really recommend watching the weather if you are raising chicks outside. Chickens are pretty good about putting themselves away and protecting themselves from the elements, but you have to watch the weather. You have to watch for it being too cold, obviously, but you also have to watch for it being too hot. What is really important is to make sure that they have both somewhere they can cool down and somewhere they can heat up if they need to. So I aim in their cage to always have one spot with some sun, one spot with some shade and artificial heat, and at plenty of areas of shade where they can cool down if they need to. So you really want the chicks to be able to regulate their temperature, make sure that it is not like all in the sun and only with the supplemental heat, because then if they get too hot, where are they going to cool down? So I really make sure that they have shade if they need it. My fourth point is that drafts can be very deadly when it comes to chicks. So the reason we're able to use this radiant heat brooder to raise chicks even outside is because we are really keen on eliminating alternating drafts around the area of the chicks. So we want it to be pretty darn stagnant air. As you guys can see, they still have lots of airflow up top. So especially if it gets really hot, that hot air is gonna rise. They're still gonna get airflow in there. We did have a few days where it was like over 90 degrees and I ended up taking this plastic down because they were getting a little toasty in there. I guess as a side note, if you're raising chicks outside, you're just gonna need to check on it more too, because there's so many things changing. But drafts are your enemy, especially when it comes to making sure these chicks have somewhere to stay warm. So especially at night, you want to make sure that that brooder is someplace where the hot air or the warm air can collect, and those chicks can have kind of a almost stagnant, just a draft-free area that is nice and hot. I like to put that brooder in the corner so that the walls kind of act almost like a mama hen and help keep that heat in there. I will link for you some articles that other people have written on creating a false mama hen. Some people will even put kind of like fabric over the top of the brooder. They'll raise chicks in the dead of winter that way, supposedly. I do worry about fire hazard a little bit there, so that's not something that I have done, but just making sure those chicks have somewhere really warm and draft free that they can go to warm up is so important. In terms of draft protection here, we have two layers. So I have this layer of plastic on the outside. This was from our greenhouse this spring, so we just reused that plastic. I'll link this for you. But we also have kind of a bucket turned upside down, which acts as like kind of a roof and walls. It's just tilted up just slightly. So there are two layers of draft protection, and inside that tote, actually it's not a bucket, it's a tote, inside that tote is their brooder. So there is just so much good space for that heat to collect and make a really nice toasty area, and the chicks just love darting in and out as they please. Sometimes when the sun's out, they like to sunbathe a little bit, but I love watching them go in and out as they please. They are pretty darn good at regulating their temperature and knowing where to go. Number 5, it is so important. This might be the biggest risk to chicks outside, is protection from water. And I'm specifically not just saying protection from rain, which is definitely very important, but especially water on the ground too. So we have kind of a makeshift. What we used to have is a big tent that was up over the top of this, and that protected from rain really well, but unfortunately it was kind of a flimsy tent. So actually right now with the bucket, they just sleep under the brooder at night, and with the bucket, and then we have a layer of plastic here, and then I have kind of this liner that came with the kennel. Like I said, super fancy, just something heavy on top to keep it there in case it gets windy. We've had some gnarly storms come through, and actually this has done a really good job keeping them dry. So obviously you want to protect them from the top, then you want to make sure that they have some protection from the sides, because if you get some winds going when the rain's coming down, even if the top is covered, they could get flooded in there if the wind is coming in from the sides. So far this has been the sweet spot for us. When it has stormed, I've checked on them multiple times. I was super nervous the first few times, but so far so good. But then the other biggest factor with water that people need to be careful of is to make sure the chicks are not on ground that is going to get flooded. So way too often, I know this happens a lot with meat chickens, if people aren't paying attention, people forget to take into consideration kind of drainage, or obviously where the water is running. What happens is the water, as it's raining a bunch, will, even though everything is covered, it'll run into that chick pen and it'll just start flooding the chicks from the bottom up. And that is a really quick way to lose chicks, especially if it gets chilly at all. You know, being cold is one thing that is dangerous for chicks, but being wet and cold is like game over. They will pass away so fast from that. So you want to make sure that you put your chicks somewhere that they are not going to get flooded. Right now they're on kind of some tall grass, and they're in just a spot that everywhere around it absorbs water pretty well, and we haven't had any flooding issues. It's kind of high ground too, so just make sure you watch for that if you decide to raise chicks outside. Even with all the supplemental heat in the world, if they get flooded from the bottom up, a lot of chicks are just never going to survive that. Another thing to consider when raising chicks outside are some of the potential ingestion hazards. Now, when I first started raising chicks, I was so careful about what they ate, and I was so afraid, did a lot of worrying. Since we've raised quite a few chickens now, I have come to learn that they are pretty good at getting past many kinds of ingestions that they maybe shouldn't have taken in. So I have seen chicks as young as 2 days old, pecking at the grass, having a great time. When I would have worried in the past, they've turned out just fine. If you can have a broody hen teach them what they can and what they cannot eat, that's a major plus. But I just kind of had to put that warning out there because I know a lot of people worry a lot about what chicks eat, especially if they may or may not have access to grit that is the appropriate size. They may have more trouble breaking it down. This is our third batch of chicks we've raised outside since we got them, and so far so good, but I feel like I have to put that out there because it could be a risk for somebody somewhere. Okay, the last 2 points I have for you, I just want to go over. Number 1, predator protection. Predator protection is going to be very important. Obviously, if you're raising chicks outside, I have found that it is a little more difficult with chicks outside than it is with regular chickens. And the main reason for that is because they are so small. They can fit through such tiny little gaps. So like this kennel for the first week or 2 actually doesn't cut it because they can squeeze their little fluffy bodies through those bars, and they escape quite a lot if we don't put some netting in there, some hardware cloth. So just keep that in mind. Like this plastic, they just kind of, I don't know if they liquefy or what, but they just kind of go right through it. So know that predator protection is going to be a little bit more difficult with chicks. They're louder, so they're always just kind of peeping, and predators are going to hear that. Dogs tend to find that very exciting. So just know if you want to raise chicks outside, predator protection is, in my opinion, a little bit more challenging than it is for full-size chickens. If you can have a predator-proof coop and just raise those chicks straight in that coop, that's usually the easiest way to do it. That's how we did it in the fall with those chicks, but since these ones are so tiny, they're not ready to meet the big girls yet. So we have to keep them separate until they are a little bit bigger. Fun fact, certain breeds will escape more often than others. These Icelandic chicks we have get out all the time, and we have them in with a group of some production reds, and those production reds don't go anywhere. So they have not, I think maybe 1 escaped this entire time, but we've had at least 100 escapees from the Icelandic chicken. So I'm guessing the breeds that are more flighty, the breeds that are more interested in foraging, are probably going to be more likely to slip through the cracks even as baby chicks. It's amazing how deep those instincts can sometimes run. All right, the last and maybe most important point that I'm going to make is to know their peeps. Hear that? That was perfect timing. So that peep, it is kind of a loud, rhythmic peep. Okay, normally their peeps are kind of quiet. They're kind of beep, 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 beep. It's okay if they talk, but that loud rhythmic peep is a red flag. Now, if they just do it for a few seconds, it's totally fine. Sometimes they get worked up because someone took one of their treats and they're mad about it, or they're facing the wall and they think they're all alone and they're calling for their friends, and then they turn around and they're like, oh, there you are. Okay, everything's fine. So sometimes it'll happen for a few seconds, and that's totally fine. But if it's going on for more than a few seconds, I can actually hear it from inside our house. That's how we know one of them has gotten out and it needs to be put back in. So it could mean a chick is escaped, alone, afraid. It could mean a chick is in danger, being hunted by something. It could mean a chick is cold. It could mean a chick is wet. Or even potentially sick and just calling for help. So that loud rhythmic peeping is what you want to be able to recognize, and it's why I don't recommend it for first-time chicken owners, because a lot of times they're not going to be able to recognize that as quickly as people who have raised chicks many times before. We know that sound, and we immediately know that they need some help with something. So when I first had my chicks set up outside, that's the main thing I was looking for when I would check on them at night to make sure they're warm enough. I was making sure they weren't making that loud rhythmic peeping sound, and I was making sure they weren't stretching their backs to try and reach the top of the brooder to try and be warmer. They were all hunkered down nice, and they were all quiet, and they were making those very content sort of little beep 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 those sounds, which let me know that everything is okay. So those are the main components that we have been really careful about and conscious of when raising chicks outside, and those are some things that I really recommend you think about too. That being said, you know, raising chicks outside is definitely my preferred way of doing it now. It is so much cleaner, and actually I'll just go right into the pros and cons that I've noticed. So major pro is that it's not so messy. Even if you have something to contain the mess like I have had in the past with our chicks, they still have dust that comes from their bodies. They have dust that comes from the bedding. So that tends to get everywhere if you're raising them inside, which is, I think, well worth it in the long run. But if you can get away with doing outside, this is my new preferred method. On top of that, it's cheaper because we don't need bedding. We just move this kennel every few days and fertilizes the lawn, so that's a big plus. Obviously, it's going to depend on kind of the setup, the exact setup and environment that you have, but that's what's worked for us. Another pro is that I find they've just been much happier chicks. They're not trying to escape nearly as much. They're not bored inside. They're not pecking each other. And we've had generally happy chicks for the most part too, but they are just so happy outside. I just love to watch chickens being chickens. I think that's the coolest part about raising them, is just watching them be themselves and peck at grass and chase bugs. And I think they're fun animals to watch. So I think they are generally happier outside, but obviously if you can't raise them outside safely and healthfully, then they're not going to be happier that way. So you have to make sure you're doing it right. The question is, are they healthier outside? Maybe. They are definitely going to be exposed to bacteria sooner. So keep that in mind. Things like coccidiosis. They could get potentially sicker younger. Hasn't happened to us yet, but I know it happens to people on the regular. So just keep that in mind. There are definitely more risks, and that just kind of brings me to the cons section. Number one, there's more risk. There's more sickness outside. There's more predator risk outside. There are more elements outside. So there's going to be more risk involved. If you are more of a risk aversive person, then probably keeping them inside for longer is going to be the way to go. And I will say, kind of in this con section, if you don't have a broody hen to teach them, my theory is that it's probably riskier to raise chicks outside without a mama hen to teach them about life, I guess, outside than it is to raise them inside and have them outside later on. I only say that because I know a lot of people say it's fine to raise chicks outside because broody mamas raise chicks outside. But there is so much that those mamas teach them that helps mitigate risk. So I think it's probably riskier to do it without a broody hen. That being said, we haven't lost any chicks to the elements outside or to ingestion outside. We haven't lost any chicks when raising them outside for any reason that we couldn't have potentially lost them inside too. Like I said, I don't recommend this for beginners, but these animals are very capable of walking on grass at 3 days old. In fact, they seem to quite enjoy it. So it's just one of those things that you're gonna have to weigh your experience, and you're gonna have to weigh the risks and decide what is best for your chicks. If you've ever raised chicks outside or have any tips or tricks in that arena, please leave a comment below. I always love to hear from other people who have tried this as well. Otherwise, thanks for watching today, and we'll see you next time.